Okie dokie. Hello, every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a little bit of a kind of sort of rematch-ish type of thing. And today we are talking about Tactics Ogre 1 Vision Ravness versus Final Fantasy Tactics Agrias. Now, this is kind of a funny rematch because we had a lot of sort of interesting arguments that were brought up last time in terms of whether or not certain things would or should work in the matchup in question. And then also we had arguments as far as like the lore implications of certain things, like whether or not certain characters would do certain things and whatever else. And so we're going to address some slash most of that here today, hopefully. And yeah, talk about the One Vision matchup here. So, essentially, Tactics Ogre One Vision is like a... Imagine if someone took the best parts of most SRPGs out there and just, like, smushed them into one beautiful love project, and then just, like, refined that thing over an absurdly long time. So, just, like... There's a lot of FFT stuff already in here. So, for example, heavier armor making your health bar go absolutely nutty. We have that as a consistent thing, but then we still keep the actual like armor system, like Tactics Ogre and whatnot. And then on top of that, we have, for example, most of the abilities that we'll see off of somebody like Agrias split between the Freya and Paladin, essentially the male and female versions of this particular thing. So, like, let's say you give somebody a spear, and you have what are known as sub finishers. So, for example, we have hitting in a line and inflicting shackle, or Storm Rider over here that's going to do damage and also stun something, whereas if they go and put on a one-handed sword, they may do a smite, which is going to be a single target plus a bind, or a fire damage in an area and inflicting fear. In both these cases, they're meant to be vaguely similar-ish if you squint to sort of like FFT abilities, because again, Ravness was originally supposed to be this kind of archetype here. Now, that being said, though, we have an interesting little wrinkle in that we not only have this sort of like version that has a chance to do certain debuffs, we still have the standard One Vision finishers, which are going to have guaranteed debuffs every single time that they're used. So, for example, this one will always inflict Silence plus Rupture. This one will always do a TP drain or a bar drain. In this case, we can assume that would be like an MP drain kind of thing. We have an AoE sweep. We've got Charybdis for a slow. Essentially, the idea is that every one of these will have some sort of effect to there, and it will always be guaranteed. Now, this isn't necessarily going to help that much in this particular matchup. It's just kind of an interesting little mechanical wrinkle. Now, that being said, what's funny here is that I would say in pretty much all situations, this more or less comes down to the fact that when we have this particular matchup, it's certainly going to Agrias about 80% of the time, no questions asked. The reason for that is largely because the one thing that she has as a major notable advantage here is still this insta-kill move. Now, when this came up in the Tor argument, essentially what happened here was a couple of things. So for one thing, there was a argument back and forth as to whether or not stuff like False Strike or Dodge should actually affect it, because it's something that doesn't normally miss. And that was actually kind of the interesting wrinkle when it comes to Tor's mechanics, because I feel like some of the arguments there, as far as its perfect accuracy, like, they have a point, but I want to point out something else there. The reason that those in particular were used is because it isn't like an accuracy question anymore when it comes to Tor. Essentially, False Strike and Dodge are not like we improved the odds and now they're better. Instead, it's like, oh, we have taken away 20% of the potential of this thing to do a thing. So, for example, in the case of Dodge, it's like, oh, there's just 20% of that thing's physical accuracy that doesn't exist anymore for a few turns. Or in the case of Dodge, it's the same thing, just applied in the other direction, and those two are allowed to stack. So that's why I was saying it was guaranteed 40%, because that's the mechanic. The mechanic is, I have 20% here, I have 20% here, you stack them together, now you got 40%. So essentially, it was this weird mechanic. It's the only time they did that in any one of these. So that's why it was allowed to count, because it's a question over whether or not this is a physical attack. It technically counts as a physical attack. So whether or not it could or should count, I mean, it counts for finishers, which is basically what all these moves are. Would it count the same as overheads? Well, overheads, they suddenly can miss in that particular version. Even guaranteed moves, unless they are very literally mentioned as being guaranteed, which this, as far as I'm aware, doesn't mention that it has, an absolute guarantee on hit. It's pretty much always going to hit, but I don't see anything listed saying that it's a guaranteed hit. Anyways, I just want to explain. That was the logic there behind that one. So in the case of something like in the case of TOV here, essentially I would assume that, yeah, they probably will be able to hit because there is no, like, hi, I invented a new bullshit over here mechanic. So effectively, what we would assume is that their armor system would basically work the same way. Namely, if they went for high vit armor, they will be freakishly defensive. And so, for example, even if this is, let's say, hitting normally, like, we'll assume it works something like Draconics would, since they are somewhat similar in one vision there. We'll assume that to some extent they can bypass armor, but we'll assume that they still can probably resist a huge chunk of the actual, like, direct damage and whatnot. But it's the debuff. It's the debuff that matters here. There's a lot of options defensively for somebody like the Freya there. And so, for example, they can stack a lot of defense, but they're not exactly much of an offensive powerhouse. So this means that eventually this would probably end up breaking through and probably would end up being a win 80% of the time. I would assume if two players were going and playing against each other, that's probably what it would break down to. So what about that other 20%? What's the deal there? So I was looking over the different options for the Freya here. It's like, okay, they could go for swords. Most of those sub-finishers wouldn't really help them out here. We've got a lot of different options for different type of moves over here on our swords, and there are certain things that you'd probably want to keep on hand just to make sure that certain debuffs couldn't happen. But that insta-kill, there's nothing that technically prevents an insta-kill. Just like the ribbon over in FFT, I mean in premise, not like in terms of direct debuffs. We've got something like full ward / death proof over here, where it prevents most things, but it's like a very oddly specific thing, so there's going to be gaps. So like the full protection ability over here is Petrify, Sleep, Bewitch, Charm, Spendthrift, Paranoia, Bind, Shackle, Stop, Wither, and Curse. Is Curse the same as Insta-Kill? I don't think so, but like, I'm going to assume Curse and Chicken Status are basically the same thing, considering that Curse bottoms out your luck, and therefore would be your activation chance, presumably, in FFT, and therefore I'm going to go ahead and equate that to... I'm going to, like, roughly equate that to Chicken, I guess. Not that it would help here, I just think it's kind of an interesting little matchup, but... Okay, so all this armor isn't necessarily going to help. The other mechanical interesting wrinkle over here, okay, let's finish talking about their weapons, okay? So, they do have potentially more interesting finishers over here, but the thing is, every time that they look at their equipment, they potentially have an option, but it won't necessarily be the direct option. Like, one option that I was looking at here is like, okay, we assume that evasion is going to be a pretty big deal versus an FFT character. So we go one-handed axe, we go ultra lightweight, essentially go maximum evasion with this shit. And so at that point, does the 100% hit chance still apply? I mean, probably, even with all of this really, really, really high evasion, basically nothing would be able to touch her in this setting, but presumably still would have at least 25% chance to hit. So, okay, that's not ideal, and granted, this thing's probably going to be 100% chance to hit anyway, which would still mean 15% chance of death. Okay, so that's not necessarily going to help us here. So we'll assume regular evasion, probably not helping, but we have no guaranteed nonsense evasion, so, you know... In many ways, I guess you could say the whole, like, dodge and fall strike thing is kind of like how we got Shiri over in FFT, where it's just like, here's this thing that says, okay, your hit chance is like this thing, or your dodge chance is this thing over here because we said so, kind of a situation. Anyway, so besides the point, though, so let's get back to it. So I was thinking, okay, why would, so to explain this mechanically, why would something like this kind of matter here, right? So, essentially, we've got the Crest of Fire over here. This is going to be pretty much always going to be here just due to more or less being like, what if the ribbon also gave you freakish amounts of stats and everything else? Not to mention, it turns somebody's weight negative, which means that it actively makes them go faster when they're wearing it. From there, we have stuff like the Mirage Cloak and Scout Leggings, which are going to weigh less than half of the previous armor set. And additionally, we can swap out the shield. For comparison's sake, weight-wise, the Aegis is 5, the main Gauche is 2. So essentially, we're taking on less than half half of our weight all of a sudden, which is a dramatic speed increase. Now, it puts her very close overall to something like a griffin in its natural state. The reason that this is relevant is because it gives us a frame of reference. Because, again, I like to scale things not off of, like, planetary nonsense, but to scale things based off of, stuff that we can directly compare in the field. How much can they potentially do versus how much do they take versus any random soldier that's out there. And so, for example, somebody like the Griffin in this setting is essentially somebody that is in most situations going to be able to typically take about anywhere between 2 to 3 turns in the same time that it would take a single soldier to act. So we'll assume that her speed is roughly on par with that. When it comes to Agrias, she's roughly on par speed-wise with everybody else. Maybe slightly faster, but for all intents and purposes, we'll assume she's more or less the same speed. So with lighter weight, this would mean, in theory, that somebody like Ravness would probably be able to get double turns. Now, she is still extremely vulnerable to this whole, oh shoot, I'm about to instantly die thing, but then I got thinking. Through their different options, the reason that this axe was specifically picked was because of the recovery time delay, which would mean that essentially this would end up slowing her down even further. Our T delay, unlike slow, is not technically a debuff, it's just resetting the CT counter of a unit over and over. So in theory, could she sit there spamming recovery time delays and freakishly low speed to double turn and keep resetting her turn over and over? I mean, there's technically precedent for it. It is something that you can do in One Vision. I would assume that Agrias would catch up and just do something about it, okay? So, theoretically, possibly an option, but it's not part of that 20%. But then I got to thinking. There's potentially the most One Vision answer possible in this whole thing here, right? So I was looking over the pile of different weapons, whether hammers going for that sound effect could do it, whether we go for some like long-range pikes or something, go for the exploding spear or whatnot. But no, then I realized she's got access to stabs, which means she's got access to the Lippel's Rod, which means that her speed can potentially still be freakishly low, but she's also now got access to one thing that can prevent the North Swing Strike from doing its thing at least a couple of times, and that is going to be Decoy. So Decoy is the same thing as Evade, more or less, the thing that was nonsense last time. So essentially, a skill that does not check for damage or evasion or whatever else. All it says is, hey, the next physical thing, whatever that thing is just not there anymore. It's basically card game logic or board game logic. It's just whatever the thing is, it no longer is, right? And so this means that she could theoretically put up a decoy, but that's not much of an offensive thing. Who cares, right? So we're gonna go ahead and assume a couple of things here, okay? When it comes to Agrias, we're going to assume, okay, she's probably not going to be much of a caster out of the box. Her faith score is pretty middling, so she probably won't be going down that particular route. We'll assume as a secondary, maybe she's running things like geomancies to give her some additional range. We'll assume that as far as her evasion goes, we'll assume she's running an MP shield. Seeing as, MP shield, it probably would be pretty sensible in this case. Now, we'll assume also that she's running teleportation. Mostly because if she isn't running teleportation, this next part is completely unnecessary. I just think it's a fun thing to talk about. Okay? So we'll assume that she teleports. If she runs MP up, that would allow her to reset her MP shield, which would theoretically be better. But I think for the sake of argument, we'll let her have her MP shield, and hell, we'll let her have like MP regeneration as well as being able to teleport at the same time. Because hear me out. So, okay, so she teleports, she gets a little bit closer, right? We're a few turns in, they've taken some time to get close, and then she realizes that, okay, so she can get close-ish, she can throw out one attack, right? And it just sort of bounces off. So we're gonna say that that over on Ravness' side, I forget if it's like 2 or 3 activations of Decoy, we'll only need 2 for this thing, so we'll just go ahead and leave it there, okay? So they get close. Bars-wise, she's probably running around like 60 MP at this point, and potentially running, maybe like 50-ish TP by the time they end up getting close, right? So, whenever the MP shield needs to go away, we've got a fun little wrinkle in terms of absorb MP. So, this is going to be a 2-tile away move that allows somebody to use their action turn to essentially sap the MP out of another character. We then also have the interesting complication of Rampart Aura. Now, Rampart Aura normally wouldn't come up in stuff like this, but one thing that is established over on the Ogre side of things is that Rampart Aura, for whatever bizarre reason, block teleportation. It's unclear why, because it honestly kind of shouldn't. Somebody can go through a wall and they're like, oh no, I'm sorry, that dude's aura is just too freaking strong, I'm gonna stop right here. But whatever, it's just how it goes. But additionally, she's got access to Phalanx, so we can go ahead and drop a Phalanx over there, and we'll go ahead and pop that sucker right there. Now, why is Phalanx relevant to anything? So, we'll assume that she has gone and used Field Alchemy 1 during her couple of turns here to take that 50 TP and potentially put it up to 150 TP. Now, TP is basically like an overdrive meter in this particular case, and so what this means is that if, for example, she needed to go offensive, she could do Absorb MP, but instead, we're going to use a combination of two different abilities. Namely, like, actually, no, sorry, not 150 TP, she would have 50 TP plus a decoy up at this point. And you'll notice I haven't talked about many of Agrias' other abilities. That's because she'll get a chance to attack once, and then pretty much never get a chance to attack again. We'll give her secondaries of a calculator in a moment. But, bear with me, because this 20% is fun. Anyway, so she puts down a Phalanx. Now, Phalanx is essentially a ethereal clone. It's just a ghost statue that sits there. The thing is, one vision runs off of PSP logic, which means, or Tactics Ogre PSP logic, which means there can be a maximum of 10. These things will typically, regardless of damage source, will end up taking essentially 2 to 3 turns to go and break. Okay? There's certain skills specifically dedicated to breaking them, but either way, it takes a couple of turns to swat them away. There can be a maximum of 10 of them, and additionally, in order to get close, they would have to get past the Rampart Aura, which also extends out of this clone. So effectively, this is like a giant spider net that is slowly spreading out over every turn that is being put down. She has to go and specifically use her sword abilities, more than likely, to go and break the things. But the thing is, if she's doing that, she's taking 2 turns in order to do so, while also being unable to move, while also being unable to go on the offensive. These can be put down during an action turn, and due to the incredibly light cost of her equipment, in fact, she very possibly could just replace this with a scout vest, potentially get rid of the leggings entirely, and essentially give herself an advantage here, in that she wouldn't necessarily need any of this. We probably should just leave the scout leggings on there for the sake of having jump. But this means that she has extended movement and essentially extended vertical range. Now, actually, no, right, that's why we kept the Mirage Cloak on here. I apologize. Sometimes I will go a little bit backwards on things and get a little bit confused, but she's got the Mirage Cloak there for a reason. And in fact, we can actually probably go ahead and put on this over here for a similar reason. So we'll go ahead and probably put on the Archon Helm. There we go. And that puts her weight down a little bit, but again, she is still, in this particular case, assumed to be either getting close to double turns or having a chance to get double turns. But we further are doubling down on those double turns with Phalanx. So, with this now set up, she has essentially just more or less a way to infinitely control the zone, so to speak. She can infinitely hold down Agrias by means of ghostly bullshit. Now, you might say, wait a minute, this is a theoretical. No, this is a thing you do in One Vision sometimes. It's not that out of the ordinary, actually. Anyway, this is actually how you deal with a lot of tankier type units, given that heavier units are usually slower than Agrias would be in that particular case. Even if she's a medium type of character, again, this would basically just mean like, okay, you cannot move, you are held down over here. Would they be able to fly over it? Yes. There are ways to potentially deal with flyers, which, we can get into that. And if she ran fly, then she wouldn't have MP, in which case, if she's able to fly, then, then she wouldn't really have a defensive option. So what happens then? Is she able to just catch up? No, because technically Ravness doesn't need that movement there, because she actually has one unique ability over here that's a bit of a fun one, namely Tirana. So this is the thing that kind of changes the game here, because even if she's able to fly, she's able to just put her back. It's the thing. So Tirana is a lightning strike that also teleports somebody. So essentially what we have is somebody that has more or less complete zone control, and then just sort of like can just like do one of the little crane toy things, like reach down, pick them up, and just put them back while doing damage over and over. If they have MP shield, they essentially use that to keep regenerating that shield. But in that particular case, Absorb MP plus Tirana puts them back. Takes her MP for that MP shield, uses it to fund Tirana, put her back. But okay, how is she able to fund this? This is 60 MP every turn, which is not actually that bad, considering that she can get rid of her weapon skill entirely, and then just go and replace that with Clarity over here. Or Clarity and Efficacy. So this means that whenever it's being cast, it is... here, let me go over to the thing. Her cast cost goes down by 15%, and Clarity 3 is easily going to be enough to fund this every turn. So this means that even she's basically breaking positive on MP. As far as Tactician goes, she's passively gaining more than enough to be able to use Absorb MP every turn. With Phalanx, she can potentially skip some turns in order to do more Phalanxes, or can go use Field Alchemy 1 to go give herself a Ginseng, to then go guarantee that there's a Phalanx that turn. Essentially just being able to use a Ginseng, break positive overall on TP that turn, as well as MP, put a Phalanx down, walk away, have another turn immediately, more than likely. Now, this obviously is going to go down a lot of different potential directions here, and I would still say 80% of the time, somebody would not be running something like this. So, while it is completely diabolical, it is something that, you know, an OV player might do. I would say 80% of the time somebody tries to go the tanky route, tries to do 1v1, still ends up losing to a North Swain Strike. If somebody decides to immediately decide, okay, this thing is way too dangerous to even give a shot, then this is where we get this complicated nonsense, where it's going to be a decoy into infinite Phalanx, infinite Tirana combo. So yeah, I just thought that was kind of interesting, because yeah, unlike the Tor comparison where it's all just down to who throws out more aggression first, who's more willing to roll the dice on potentially getting that insta-kill first, in this particular case, it's like, are they willing to take this seriously enough to go for this overcomplicated nonsense? If so, easy win, no questions asked. Are they likely to? No, they probably would just try to auto-duel that shit and just forget the insta-kill move exists, which, yeah, I would say still 80% of the time goes to Agrias, but that 20% is just cool as hell. Anyway, that's about that. And my alarm is going off. It's a fun cuckoo clock thing, and I gotta get going. So, y'all, have yourselves a good one. Take care. Thank you for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.